The evil God challenge is something that I first became aware of through the work of Dr. Stephen Law, who I think is one of the most kind of prolific defenders of this argument. He's certainly not the only one, but he wrote a paper on this evil God challenge, which is essentially what the video is based upon. The basic premise, at least of the version that Stephen Law puts forward, is to say that well, how can we put this? We kind of entertain the idea of this hypothesis that that there exists this evil God whose nature is such that he's maximally evil, wants to kind of cause everyone to suffer and all of this kind of stuff. And it's generally thought, or at least Stephen Law says, that a lot of Christians will say that this idea seems absurd or incoherent, at least one of the reasons for which is that there's too much good in the world. And it seems that there's far too much good in the world to accept this idea that there would be an evil God. And the basic question that Stephen Law asks is, if the theist is allowed to say, well, God can't be maximally evil because of the fact that there's too much good in the world, why can't the atheist say that God can't be maximally good because of all of the evil in the world? And he's essentially, I guess, in that way, trying to defend or bolster or complement the problem of evil and kind of give it a reframing in light of this view that says, well, if people would dismiss out of hand this idea of an evil God based on all of the good in the world, then they should equally be in a position to dismiss the good God hypothesis in virtue of all of the evil in the world. And I know that Max doesn't necessarily agree that we should dismiss this idea of an evil God out of hand in the same way that Stephen Law does, but that's the argument that Dr. Law puts forward, and that's the argument that I was defending in the video.
Hi everyone. In this video I wanted to talk about a philosophical problem that has been debated since the 2nd century, and that is the problem of evil as it relates to a good God. In the video you just watched, you heard a YouTuber named Alex O'Connor discuss the idea that God could be evil, since Christians use the argument that because there is good in the world, that proves God is good. One could use the opposite argument that all the evil could prove God is evil. I want to present a solution to this problem that perhaps very few have thought of, at least that I know of. And that is the idea that God is amoral in nature, and that this can explain why he would allow evil. The argument goes like this: God is neither inherently morally good nor evil, and that the argument that a morally good God would allow evil can only be sound if God is morally good. So the answer to the problem of evil is simple, that God is not good nor evil, therefore he would allow evil. Now I want to dive a little deeper into this because it may seem like I am oversimplifying this. So we all, as Christians, we have heard the critics of the Bible when they mention the so-called atrocities and evil things that God commanded in the Old Testament. But most people, though not all, who make these critiques don't believe in objective morality. And even those that do can't prove morality is objective. What most skeptics and us Christians alike must understand is that even in a theistic worldview, morality must be subjective. Yes, that's right. As someone who believes in the Bible with my whole heart and strongly believes there is a personal God, I do not believe in objective morality. Let me explain. When we think about God, what is his most important attribute? Some say it's his love, others his holiness, and others his sovereignty over creation. However, I don't think any of these properties are the most essential. I believe the most essential property of God isn't really a property, but it's his absoluteness. God's absoluteness is simply his innate freedom from all forms of constraint, limitations, and boundaries, and that he has no duties or obligations to anything outside himself, which is why we should be grateful when he acts on our behalf. In any case, this definition of absoluteness would absolutely include morality. Meaning, if God is morally good, this means he cannot be absolute, since moral goodness would be a constraint on his nature. And instead, it makes more sense to see God as amoral. This is most consistent with God's absoluteness, and that morality, therefore, is an extrinsic property that God accommodates himself in order to relate to us. This idea can also explain why God's commandments can change from the Old to the New Testament. It's because it's subjective, even to God. Therefore, when we look at genocide in the Old Testament or slavery, these things are not objectively wrong, as messed up as that might seem to say, but only in our modern day do we think it's wrong. It's likely that in biblical times, no one thought that what Israel did to the Canaanites, for instance, was wrong. In fact, it was probably relatively tame compared to how all the other nations practiced warfare. That's how they all did it. We think it's wrong because we have been conditioned by society to think that. There is no such thing as objective morality. Therefore, because God is amoral, there is nothing within him that compels him to end evil and suffering. Aside from this, I might add that human beings today are not direct descendants of Adam and therefore not inherently image bearers of God. But more on that in another video. I want to say, however, this does not mean that God is unwilling to end suffering or that he is indifferent to it. However, I believe why he hasn't is because of our self-righteousness and ego. More on that in another video as well. In conclusion, God can't be a moral monster because God can't be moral or immoral. Those who would argue that a good God would never allow evil, this conclusion is only true if God is innately good. The so-called evil commandments in the Bible are only evil to us in our day and age. But the God of the Bible seems to cause both good and evil. The well-known passage in Isaiah 45:7, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. And the Christians who would say, oh, that's talking about physical evil. But physical evil is oftentimes caused by moral evil. When God decreed that the Assyrians would conquer Israel in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5 through 7, was he not decreeing their moral evil as well? The fact is, what God really cares about is our rights and freedom, not some objective standard we all must listen to and follow. If you are a Christian hearing this, stop shooting yourself in the foot by holding to some objective morality you can't prove. If you are a skeptic, stop claiming things are morally evil that you yourself claim human beings can change tomorrow. The best answer and solution is oftentimes the one nobody considers. So let's be more open-minded, especially when it comes to God. Thank you. If you like this video, share, comment below, and subscribe. And hit that notification bell, and have a good day.